And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's April the 16th, the day after the dreaded tax day. 259 days remain to the year's over with. And we got some interesting holidays and observances for Wednesday, April 16th. It's National Librarian Day, National Banana Day, National Eggs Benedict Day, Selena Day, the murdered pop star, Save the Elephant Day, Canadian Film Day, National Healthcare Decisions Day, National Wear Your Pajamas to Work Day. Now, I see folks wearing pajamas almost every place I go. National Bean Counter Day, National Orchid Day, National Discover National Parks Fortnight, and Orthodox Holy Week. And let's not forget Cambodian New Year. Well, having seen what is in the holidays are, let's talk about stories in the news. State of Maine has been hit with a lawsuit for defying President Trump's executive order on trans athletes and women's sports. The Maine folks seem to think that that's perfectly okay for trans to take part in women's sports. Women, on the other hand, have a different idea. Now, what's so silly is the people pushing it are women. New York Attorney General Letitia James is been hit for possible prosecution over allegations of mortgage fraud. She's accused of listing a house in Virginia as her primary residence and listing her father as her husband on mortgage applications. And her response will be, I was just a little confused. And the jury will say, that's perfectly all right. We understand how that can happen. Well, Trump has redoubled his attack on Harvard, saying it's lost its way and doesn't deserve any federal funding. A GOP, Marjorie Taylor Greene, GOP elected official, did a town hall, and 2 people were tasered by police, and 3 were arrested. It was ridiculous. Reporters on the ground in the event in Georgia indicated there were at least 6 protesters escorted out of the building within minutes of it starting. 3 of them were eventually charged by police for their involvement in disruption, including 1 for disorderly conduct. It's 9 times out of 10, the people doing the protesting and disrupting are Democrats. Well, an American pastor who was kidnapped in South Africa, rescued after a Dundee police shootout. Fellowship Baptist Church pastor Josh Sullivan, allegedly kidnapped by several armed masked men who broke into his church in the Eastern Cape province in April. The director of the Priority Crime Investigation, or HAWKS, released a statement announcing an operation led by the agency resulting in a successful rescue of an American pastor who was kidnapped. The 34-year-old Josh Sullivan of Tennessee, kidnapped with several armed masked men last week at his church in the Eastern Cape, Fellowship Baptist Church, Motherwell. Why he was there, anybody's guess, but, well, the real ID is something you have to have by a specific date. And New Jersey residents are having to struggle to get this new identification. In fact, many Americans are rushing to book appointments to their local motor vehicle bureau to get the real IDs as the deadline for the license is fast approaching. Beginning May 7th, air travelers at domestic airports and people entering some federal buildings have to have what's known as a real ID. Some states, such as New Jersey, are so overwhelmed with demand right now, there are no appointments available. Even with addition of extra booking slots. Gene Hackman's wife did a lot of internet searches right before her death. She was searching COVID symptoms multiple times before her death at home in Santa Fe. She inquired about COVID-19 and flu-like symptoms multiple times before she died. Through a search of her computer, investigators discovered an email she sent to her massage therapist where she admitted Jean took a COVID test after experiencing flu and cold-like symptoms. Prior to her email, she had researched COVID at least 4 times before pursuing medical attention at the Wellberry Health Center in Santa Fe. It's interesting to note that she actually had Honta. And then, of course, he had Alzheimer's. Now, liberal outlets are saying dogs are actually bad for the environment. They're environmental villains, according to the Guardian report. A lot of ridiculous things going around right now. Well, Zelensky and J.D. Vance gone head-to-head over Zelensky's comments on 60 Minutes about Trump in the White House. The White House has quietly floated a millionaire tax hike proposal in Congress as GOP leaders signal their opposition. Now, we've got a lot of Democratic elected officials who have become millionaires in their time in Congress. You have to kind of question that. They've got a case where a 28-year-old has stormed the courthouse using pepper spray. This was in Massachusetts, don't you know? He sprayed officers in a courthouse near Boston. Nicholas Ackerberg, 28, of Yarmouthport, Massachusetts, has been ordered held with his bail revoked. He's wearing a gas mask and tactical gear. Caught on video walking into a courthouse in a Boston suburb. He attacked several people with pepper spray. This happened on Monday. He sprayed multiple court officers, a police officer, and even an assistant district attorney. Security footage from the courthouse shows a man wearing a helmet, gas mask, tactical boots, and sunglasses, spraying people with pepper spray. He was eventually tackled by other officers. He punched and shoved and assaulted multiple people before several officers subdued him. Okay. California has sued to block President Trump for what they're calling illegal tariffs. California is arguing that Trump doesn't have the authority to impose tariffs. I don't know that that is true, but Japanese influencer is saying that Trump's doing the right thing regarding China. Japanese YouTuber Yoko Ishii says fear of Chinese military expansion drives her support for Trump. Under a new GOP proposal, Easter Monday could become a federal holiday. Senator Eric Schmidt, Republican of Missouri, and Representative Riley Moore, Republican of West Virginia, leading the way on legislation to make the day following Easter Sunday a holiday. Several other countries are also recognizing the holiday. In a thread posted on X, Smith cited a poll that 81% of Americans celebrated Easter as of 2023. That's according to the National Retail Federation and Proper Insights and Analytics. It's not a radical idea. It's a federal recognition of a tradition that's central to Western civilization. Tradition is already recognized as a public holiday in nations across the world, including Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and most of Western Europe. Easter's a floating holiday. It can fall from March 22nd to April 25th. Only 2-month gap. My fellow holiday calendar is April to May. Easter Monday holiday fills the gap, creating a 3-day weekend when workers and families need it most. He said it's pro-worker, pro-family, and pro-faith. Now, Texas is going to create its own version of Doge as a bill has passed both chambers. It's a new Texas regulatory office that aims to streamline state regulations and eliminate unnecessary rules. I got to talk with them about some of the rules in the place I live. They're silly. A serial offender has been accused of horrific crimes. He's been in and out of jail for 2 decades. Sort of a revolving door, don't you know? His name is Nathan Blackman. And with the years, his actions have become more brazen. He's now killed a school teacher, injured her adopted son who has Down syndrome, ran over him. Hooters are going to do away with bikini night, and I'm shocked and stunned. Who wouldn't want to see gorgeous girls in bikinis? They want to attract families in the over 60 crowd. I would say to you that girls in bikinis would attract me no matter what age I'm at. Well, Democratic rising star is saying Vance is a key long-term threat, needs to be defeated. Representative Ro Kahana says we need more from our leadership. We've got to oppose Trump and everything he stands for, and that includes Vance. Common medical tests have been linked to 5% of cancers. CT scans actually pose a risk. Doctors say balance is the key. Well, just when you thought he was gone, Pat Boone is back. Fears America being destroyed by guilt through accusation. His new song is One Voices for Tanzania. Supports efforts to bring clean water and other basic necessities to the people of Tanzania. He's worried about what he calls a terrible time with strife and anger and fear in this country. Well, maybe so. Senator John Thune says the first 100 days of the GOP Senate majority has accomplished a lot, and there's a lot still to do. Liam Neeson will replace Leslie Nielsen in the Naked Gun reboot. Very few people could pull off what Leslie Nielsen did. I question whether Liam Neeson's the one to do it. Well, former President Joe Biden returned to the podium for the first time to attack Trump's Social Security plans. He claimed that Trump wanted to wreck it so they can rob us. He came out. This was at the Advocates Council as representatives for the Disabled Conference in Chicago. He shuffled to the podium, didn't even wait for his theme music to stop, started talking about what made him get behind being pro-civil rights, which may or may not have been true. His keynote address in less than an hour focused on his accomplishments with Social Security when he was president. Took aim at how the Trump administration is keeping the elderly up at night with worry over their Social Security benefits. And of course, he did his usual mumbling. Naval Academies made the decision to move any book that reflects a lack of discernment and broader reluctance to engage in complex racial issues. Tim Walsh mocked for claims that Democrats should have doubled down on DEI wokeness. This allegedly they stand for everybody's equal, except for minorities who are better than everybody else, which I find puzzling. Major university medical centers accused of hiding DEI programs. That's according to Senator Blackburn. Instead of covering up Vanderbilt University Medical Center's DEI initiatives, she told a audience that they should comply with President Trump's efforts. The problem at Harvard being faced by Jewish students did not happen overnight. And rather than doing something about the people who attack them, the attackers are being protected. Well, the Pentagon has still got a shakeup going on. The Deputy Chief of Staff is the second advisor put on leave as a result of a DOD leak probe. Well, I think that's got our news for the moment. Well, we have been talking about all kinds of things over the last 11 seasons. We just finished up a couple of days of talking about murders in paradise. Now we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is monsters. You know, there's a lot of strange creatures that have been seen. Some not seen as often as others. I got a story that somebody ran into some giant beavers, of all things. This is comes from John Warrens of Manitoba, Canada. He's uncovered stories about giant marauding beavers, not just in Manitoba, but also in areas stretching from Alaska to Florida. Now, the term giant, just for those that are interested, is not an exaggeration. Talking about beavers the size of people and even larger. Incredible as it may sound, these beavers really did once exist. According from recovered bones, giant beavers in a separate classification from the ones we know. It's been named Castorioides ohioensis after the state where its remains were first discovered. He also notes he has a number of reports on file of bear-sized beavers, with the sightings of huge beaver lodges, which come close to the size of an average house. Hardly surprising their lodges would be so huge. I mean, not much else would be suitable for a creature that reaches up to as high as 7 feet tall and weighs in excess of 250 pounds. Although the giant beaver is believed to have become extinct about 10,000 years ago, that's the same time frame in which the mammoth and the mastodon disappeared. It's important to note that reports like these obtained by Warrens are nothing new. You can find reports of huge, violent beavers that cover both the U.S. and Canada and date back for centuries. Perfect example took place in 1808. Alexander Henry the Younger, exploring the Red River in Manitoba, encountered a native man near the fork of the Red and the Assiniboine River. That's today the site of Winnipeg. His journal for that time contains an entry that confirms a giant beaver story having been told to him by his Native American friend. The assault talk we found there attended with the Cortez Aurelius came to him that evening in a very ceremonious manner, and after having lighted and smoked his pipe, told him he was having been up a small river a few days ago on a hunting excursion. One evening, while up on the water in his canoe, watched the beaver so he could shoot them. Suddenly surprised by the appearance of a very large animal in the water. There at first he thought it was a moose deer, preparing to shoot at it accordingly, but on its approach toward him, he perceived it to be one of the Kinik, or large beavers. He didn't dare fire, but allowed it to pass on quite near his canoe without molesting it. I already heard many stories concerning these large beavers among the Saulteaux, and can't put any faith in them. Fear, he was sure, magnifies the ordinary beaver into one of these monsters. Well, maybe it was a moose deer or a bear in the dark. It was quite often are taken for one of these huge beavers. And even those that believe in them said they're scarce. While Henry's words clearly demonstrate his skepticism, they're important in the sense that they confirm that accounts of giant beavers existed centuries ago. As for John Orm's extensive research, it suggests that the giant beavers are still with us, although there are not many of them. And from giant beavers, let's talk about giant spiders. A lot of folks I know have a fear of spiders. What if you came upon a giant spider? In fact, for vast numbers of the human population, spiders provoke a very sense of creepiness and dread. And for people with arachnophobia, it can cause outright terror. And that's often as a result of an encounter with a small spider. So what would you think would happen if you encountered a spider the size of a dog? Well, if you think that can't happen, it's time to think again. For decades, accounts have surfaced of giant-sized spiders, ones that easily rival anything conjured up by the world of Hollywood. We had a spider that got into the house that was the size of a dinner plate. The largest known spider is the South American bird-eating spider, which goes by the name of Pterophosa blundi. One particular specimen, a 12-year-old named Rossi, had an impressive leg span of just under 12 inches, making her the largest living spider on record ever. That doesn't mean nothing larger than Rossi exists, though. Simply the movies who have formally classified it, or them, but more than a few people claim to have seen these things. 2001 English cryptologist Dr. Carl Schuker, a fascinating story from explorer Bill Gibbons, who spent a great deal of time investigating reports of the Congo's most famous monster, the long-necked Mokele Mbembe. The story dates back to 1938. Experiences of a pair of explorers, Reginald and Marguerite Lloyd, were negotiating a jungle pathway in the heart of the Belgian Congo. They saw something very strange step out in front of them. First, they thought it was a crouching person, or maybe a crouching monkey. But their shock and disbelief had quickly become clear it was neither one. It was a gigantic spider, when it had legs that spanned 4 feet. Reginald Lloyd, realizing the enormity of the situation, never mind the enormity of the creature, they reached for his camera. Unfortunately, that creature raced across the track and vanished into the undergrowth before he could get what would have surely have been a priceless photograph. Now, the pair had no doubts about what they'd encountered, though, and it was a truly giant 8-limbed monstrosity. The amazing account of the Lloyds doesn't stand alone. The local Baka Pygmy people have long-standing stories of these Goliath-sized spiders, which are said to be far rarer today than they once were. Although reportedly one of their tribesmen saw one of these terrifying things in 2003. And as for the lairs of these creatures, the Baka maintain they create something akin to huts, which they fashion out of leaves and vegetation. And they're also skilled weavers of massive thick webs that they build and snare their prey, which can include anything up to the size of a small antelope. And here in the U.S., there's a 1948 report of William Sladen, his wife and grandchildren, which echoes the reports coming out of the Congo a decade earlier. Location is Leesville, Louisiana. Family was walking to a nearby church for an evening of worship and prayer when their journey was suddenly interrupted, and in horrific fashion, let me say. As they strolled along the road, to their horror, a giant spider, described as being the size of a washtub, came out of a ditch and raced across the road. Well, I would venture to guess that in the future the family did not walk to that particular church along that stretch of road. Well, from Louisiana, let's go to Papua New Guinea. From there, we've got a story told by Debbie and Peter Hines, noted Australian cryptozoologist. And this came from the father of one of Debbie's friends. It was a man who had a bone-chilling encounter with a massive spider while serving in Papua New Guinea with the Australian military during the Second World War. According to the story, one day he had to take himself off to a scrub and answer a call of nature. While thus engaged, he noticed he was crouched down next to a very large cobweb. Not the classic fishing net sort, but the fine snow-white cottony stuff that spread all over the ground and up a tree trunk. His eyes followed it one way and then the other. It was very extensive, 10 or 15 feet either way. And then he saw the spider himself, only a foot or so away from his face. He said it was a real horror. The body, that's the thorax plus the abdomen, he describes as the size of a small dog or a puppy, and it was colored jet black. The legs were thick and hairy, but not as long as the classic dinner plate tarantula type spider that owes its size to the spread of its legs. This thing had more body bulk than spread. Needless to say, he backed out of that area very slowly and carefully. Dr. Schuker says of this particular creepy phenomenon, this is not the only report of a giant mystery spider encountered in Papua New Guinea during World War II. During an interview with cryptozoologist Rob Morphy of AmericanMonsters.com on the U.S. radio show Coast to Coast AM a couple of years ago, a telephone caller named Craig recounted how his grandfather, while serving in Papua New Guinea during World War II, encountered a monstrous spider in a web that scared him so much he hacked it to death with his machete. According to Craig's grandfather, the spider measured an enormous 3 feet from tip to tip and wasn't hairy like a lot of spiders. Instead, it was shiny and a little green in color. This nightmarish arachnid was encountered near Port Moresby, the capital of Papua New Guinea. And when I was in the jungles of Panama, in Point South, we saw a lot of strange things that shouldn't be, but were. Well, that's from giant spiders. Let's talk about gigantic insects. It's possible the southwest region of the U.S. is home to giant-sized insects that feed on us. Such a thing sounds not just unlikely and incredible, but just like the kind of scenario presented in the 1954 sci-fi movie Them. The movie was massive radioactive ants terrorize and slaughter the people of a small New Mexico town and threaten to do likewise to not just the rest of the country, but the entire planet. And that brings us to a very important question. Might, in this case, truth be stranger than fiction? Well, according to a lot of stories, it well could be. Danielle B. is a woman who for a number of years lived in the New Mexico town of Aztec. I know it well. Which, just like the far more famous New Mexico town of Roswell, has a crashed UFO legend attached to it. If you read my book, Beyond Roswell, you'll read about a lot of Mexican towns that had UFO encounters. This legend that dates back to March 1948, when reportedly a near intact flying saucer and its crew of diminutive dead pilots were found. According to Danielle, she encountered something far stranger at Aztec than deceased extraterrestrial dwarfs and a wrecked flying saucer. So one particular day in May of 2004, that Danielle decided to spend a few hours hanging out at Aztec's Heart Canyon, which, curiously enough, is exactly where the alleged UFO said to have come to Earth back in the 1940s. It's also where she had an encounter with something far worse than aliens. It was on a warm, sunny day. Found a place to sit where she could read a book and have her snacks and drinks in hand. Perfect way to spend a day off from work. At least, that's what it appeared to be. Well, she said, it was normal for a couple of hours. until she noticed a small black helicopter approaching her in the distance. Well, actually, she assumed it was a helicopter. That distance, that's what it appeared to be. But it wasn't really a helicopter. There was no thud, thud, thud sound that you associate with the fast-moving blades of a helicopter. And on top of that, it appeared to be carrying below it a small calf held tightly in place by thick ropes. Most definitely not the kind of thing you see every day. When the helicopter got close to Hart Canyon, she saw that the helicopter was actually nothing of the sort. It was a large, obscene-looking insect of about 4 meters in length. The rotor blades of the helicopter are actually the fast-beating wings of this monstrous creature. And for short, those ropes, there were nothing less than powerful-looking black limbs. Now, she could only stare in a mixture of awe, fascination, fear, and horror as that huge creature flew overhead and dropped the calf on a nearby peak and then swooped to the ground with frightening speed, pounced on the animal, and began to tear into it. Less than half an hour, that giant insect had finished his feasting and took to the skies. But Danielle said she'd been too shocked to flee the area at the time, the result of which that the terrible event was forever embedded in her memory, even though she clearly wished she wasn't there and that wasn't the case. Suspecting correctly that she told local law enforcement officials what she saw, she'd likely be booked for wasting police time. Finally made her shaky way home and stayed silent on the matter until she talked to a few folks about 3 years later. And even the people she told had to admit that Danielle's story stretches credibility to the max, despite the fact she came across as nothing less than absolutely credible, down to earth, and normal. While many might be inclined to dismiss such a bizarre account, there are those that think X-Files might well be true. It may come as a surprise to a lot of people to learn that the distant past, huge insects, not unlike what she saw, really did exist. For example, in the Jurassic period, there existed in what today is the United States a dragonfly called Reganura moniae. This was no regular dragonfly. It had a wingspan in excess of 3 feet. Another example, in 2001, Ohio State University geologists discovered fossilized remains of a centipede in an old mine. It was 5 feet long. Then there were the ancient remains of a sea scorpion unearthed from a German quarry in 2007. It was an arthropod. Sea scorpions in the same group of insects and spiders. There's also something notable about this particular sea scorpion. Slightly more than 8 feet in length. Of course, none of these oversized things were alive at the time of their discovery. In fact, they lived and walked and flew millions of years ago. But it is feasible in certain parts of the U.S. and in a great deal of stealth and maybe underground caves and caverns, certain similar things do exist today. A lot of folks might say that's not possible, but ask Danielle and you'll get a different response. To this very day, she has no doubt those things exist. She's working on her own book about it. It's a book that ties into predations of these hideous things with the so-called cattle mutilation phenomena, which has plagued and puzzled ranchers, police officers, and even the FBI for decades. Particularly so in the Southwest. In her scenario, the cattle mutilators are not satanic cults, aliens, or covert military units conducting biological warfare experiments. The mutilators, she says, are giant creatures from eras long gone that are feeding on the nation's cattle herds late at night. And maybe one day her story will finally be vindicated. And if this does happen, let's hope it's not because the huge insects have decided to turn their predatory attentions toward the human race. I mean, that's the possibility outlined in the movie Them. But one day, rather than being in science fiction, it might become reality. Well, from giant insects, let's talk about the Indian Devil. In 1899, a decidedly curious creature was encountered in Alaska by a man named Alfred Duminy and a colleague named Wainwright. Terrifying, shape-shifting nightmare that became known as the Indian Devil. Duminy, a resident of Los Angeles, told his story to the press, which was all too keen to publish this saga of the sinister kind. Of According to the story he told, in the spring of 1899, himself and a partner were going up to the Francis River where they came across an animal that apparently had been drowned and left by high water on a gravel bar. About the size and shape of a small bear, it weighed about 300 pounds. Snow white, hair about the same length and thickness as a bear's, short stubbed tail, heavy neck, head, teeth, and ears like a wolf, short legs, not over a foot in length, and feet and claws like a large dog or a wolf. Well, he and his partner examined it thoroughly and unable to determine what it was. But he said he was satisfied there's still living specimens of that same animal further to the north. The next winter, while hunting near the lower end of McPherson Lake, he came upon a queer fresh track that crossed the trail where he had been about an hour before. Snow was pretty deep, owing to the animal's short legs. It was dragging its body through the snow. Satisfying himself it was the same kind of animal he had found dead further south, and being on a good pair of snowshoes, and this animal plowing through the snow, he thought it an easy task to overtake and capture the snowplow, as he called it. Well, he found he could plow snow and beat him. After following it the entire length of Lake McPherson, about 7 miles and 2 or 3 miles up a small stream that flows into the north end of McPherson, darkness overtook him and he had to camp there for the night. He saw tracks afterwards, but never gave chase again. But the strangest part of the story is still to come. According to him, when he saw Indians the following spring near Dease Point, up in Dease Post, he described the animal to him, but couldn't get no satisfaction out of him. He had declared it was an Indian devil and said it had no heart and couldn't be killed by shooting. It had the power of changing into the form of any other animal it chose. He told wonderful tales about its ferocity and endurance. Now, they were very superstitious about it and seldom if ever visit that particular location. It's carnivorous and not hibernating. So, Dominic said he saw signs of it during the entire winter, while the bear were taking their long sleep under the snow. He never did figure out what it was. Well, from the Indian devil, let's took to the Cocogiac. Now, Nathaniel Neacock was a well-known hunter of polar bears, was scoffing at reports about the giant Cocogiac being seen in its northernmost region of North America, according to the Idaho Falls, Idaho Post-Register. It was a story May 15th, 1958. According to that story, the Cocogiacs, the name Eskimos gave to a bear they say is too big to come out of the water. Size varies with the individual story, but all agree it's a creature of great size, strength, and appetite. Well, several weeks ago, Neacock laughed so loudly when told Raymond Lalayak had reported seeing a 30-foot bear that his hearty laughing echoed and re-echoed across the great frozen polar waste. But Neacock isn't laughing anymore. He's seen a Cocogiac with his own very eyes. Now, another name for this creature is the Kinik. And that's the name that Neacock used in the interview. And he said the Kinik was grayish-white, and only its head was visible as it swam through the water. So large he didn't attempt to shoot it. He said the head alone must have been 5 or more feet long, almost as wide. And this isn't the first time a monster is reported by respected men of the village. Floyd Avocana and Roxy Ikawana, elders of the Presbyterian Church and men of undoubted veracity, tell of seeing a tremendous sea monster in 1932 while hunting with a third Eskimo who's now deceased. All three thought it was a Cocogiac or a Kinik, or a 10-legged bear, which occupies a prominent role in Eskimo legend. Until now, there have been a lot of scoffers in the village, especially about the Kinik, and that white men have been known to make reference to the coming tourist season or another abominable snowman. But since the respected Neacock added his testimony, the scoffers are strangely quiet, even fearful. Don't even hear much about how the Arctic strange mists distort distances or size, creating weird optical illusions. But you do hear retold stories about the Cocogiac, the 10-legged bear of the Eskimo legend. According to one of those stories, once upon a time there was a lazy Eskimo. He was the laziest man in the village. One evening after he'd heard the village hunters tell about their experiences, he went out on the ice, came to a large hole where some seal lungs were floating, showing that a large bear had eaten seal, leaving only the lungs. Well, the man watched and waited by the hole, and sure enough, a monstrous bear came up. As he started out of the hole, the man rammed his spear in first one eye and then the other, blinding the bear. But the bear came right on out of the water and followed the scent and gave chase after the fleeing hunter. Well, the hunter ran and ran, dodging along the lumps of ice, but he couldn't shake his pursuer. Finally, he saw two towering walls of ice with only a narrow corridor in between. Through this pass he ran, but the bear followed close upon his heels. It was too big and he stuck fast, able to back out. So the hunter turned around and, after a lot of effort, succeeded in killing the giant 10-legged bear. Well, many Eskimos, and possibly even some white men, still believe that there are Kokogiak out there somewhere in the Arctic vastness. And according to Nathaniel Neacott, 30-foot polar bear is just too big to shoot. Well, let's talk about London's bear monster. Aaron O'Donnell, renowned collector and investigator of ghost stories, told a story about a strange, ghostly bear-like monster seen in none other than London, England, at the Tower, no less. According to O'Donnell, Edmund Lethal Swifty, appointed in 1914 Keeper of the Crown Jewels in the Tower of London, refers to an article in Notes and Queries, dated 1860, to various unaccountable phenomena happening in the tower during his residence there. He said that one night in the jewel office, one of the sentries was alarmed by a figure like a huge bear issuing from underneath the jewel room floor. He thrust at it with his bayonet, which, going right through it, stuck in a doorway where, at that point, he dropped his rifle and had a fit, was carried senseless to the guard room. The next day, Swifty saw the soldier in the guard room. His fellow sentinel was also there, and the latter testified having seen his comrade before the alarm, quiet and active and in full possession of his facilities. He was now, according to Mr. Swifty, changed almost beyond recognition and died the next day. Well, Mr. George Offer, in referring to this incident, alludes to queer noises having been heard at the time of the figure appearing. And presuming the sentinel was not the victim of an hallucination, the question arose as to the kind of spirit that he saw. This bear, judging by cases that have been told by others, is by no means an uncommon occult phenomena. I can't talk. Difficulty is how to classify it. Since upon no question pertaining to the psychic, one can be dogmatized. To quote from a clever poem that appeared in the January number of the Occult Review, to pretend one knows anything definite about the immaterial is all swank. At the most, parsons and priests and theosophists and Christian scientists and psychical research professors, at the most, can only speculate. Nothing whatsoever beyond the bare fact there are phenomena unaccountable by physical laws has as yet been discovered. All the time and energy and space that have been devoted by scientists to the investigation of spiritualism and making tests and automatic writing are hopelessly futile. No one who has ever really experienced spontaneous ghostly manifestations could for one moment believe in the genuineness of the phenomena produced as seances. Never would have deceived a serious person, and experience can't be convoked on order, either through a so-called medium falling into a trance, through table turning, automatic writing, or anything else. If a spirit comes, it will either come voluntarily or in obedience to some unknown power, and it's certainly neither to satisfy the curiosity of a crowd of sensation-loving men and women, nor to be analyzed with some cold, calculating, presumptuous professor of physics whose proper sphere is the laboratory. The phenomenon of the big bear, provided again it was really objective, it may have been the phantasm of some prehistoric creature whose bones lie interred beneath the tower. We know the valley of the Thames was infested with giant reptiles and quadrupeds of all kinds. Or it may have been a vice elemental, or the phantasm of a human being who lived a purely animal life and whose spirit would naturally take the form most closely resembling it. Of course, in this day and time, knowing the armament of many of the guards at the Tower of London, it'd be interesting to see how it fared against a machine gun. Well, from monstrous creatures, let's talk about man-eating plants. The idea that there could be monstrous man-eating beasts of an unknown nature lurking in the wilder parts of our planet is not at all implausible. What about man-eating plants and trees? As incredible as that may sound, there's no shortage of reports on that flesh-eating flora. 1878, German explorer named Karl Lisch traveled to the island of Madagascar, where he witnessed nothing less than a human sacrifice to a tree. Horrific details are laid out in a letter penned by Lisch himself and sent to the South Australian Register in 1881. According to Lisch, the unfortunate victim was a woman of the Makoto tribe who was tied to the terrible tree. So apparently she was a gift to it. The slender, delicate palping with furry, a star of serpents, quivered a moment over her head, and then the instinct was with the demonic intelligence fastened upon her in sudden coils around her neck and arms, and while her awful screams echoed and more wild laughter rose wildly to be instantly strangled down again, and a gurgled moan, the tendrils one after the other, like giant serpents. Brutal energy and infernal rapidity rose, retracted themselves, and wrapped them about her in fold after fold. Researcher Brent Swenser says that the flesh-devouring tree was described as being about 8 feet in height and having an appearance reminiscent of a pineapple. 8 long pointed leaves that hung down from its top to the ground. The trunk of the tree was topped with a sort of receptacle that contained a thick liquid said to have horrific qualities that drug potential prey and is believed to be highly addictive. Surrounding the receptacle are long hairy tendrils of 6 white palpi resembling tentacles. The tree possessed white transparent leaves that reminded Lisch of the quivering mouthparts of an insect. Well, moving on, the American Weekly on January 4th, 1925, included in its pages an article entitled Escape from the Embrace of the Man-Eating Tree. It described an encounter in the Philippines in which a man referred to only as Bryant from Mississippi and his native guide came across a truly unusual tree. About 35 feet in height and roughly 90 feet in diameter. Rather ominously, the tree stunk of rotting flesh. The human skull could be seen at its base. It was the curious dimensions which gave it somewhat of a bulbous shape that first caught the attention of the man. Wasn't long at all before something else grabbed his attention. As he stood and stared at the tree, he realized in a hurry it was reaching out for him. And according to the story in the American Weekly, the whole thing had changed shape and was horribly alive and alert. The all heavy leaves that sprung from their compact formation were coming at him from all directions, advancing on the ends of the long vine stems that stretched across like the necks of innumerable geese, and now the old man had stopped his screaming. The air was full of hissing sounds. Leaves didn't move straight at their target. No, they had a graceful side-to-side sway like a cobra about to strike. From the far side, the distant leaves were peeping and swaying on their journey around the trunk, and even the treetop was bending down to join in the attack. And the bending of the trunk, he added, was spasmodic and accompanied by sharp cracks. With the effect of his advancing, swaying mass of green objects was hypnotic, like the charm movements of a snake. Bryant couldn't move, though the nearest leaf was within an inch of his face. He could see it was armed with sharp spines, which the liquid was forming. He saw the heavy leaf curve like a green mitten hand as it brushed his eyebrows and passing out the smell of it. That was the same animal smell that hung in the air. Another instant, and the thing would have had his eyes in its sticky, prickly grasp, but either his weakness or the brown man's strength drew them both on their backs. The charm had been broken. They crawled out of the circle of death, lay panting on the grass, while the malignant quacking and hissing yearned and stretched and thrashed to get at him. Well, despite the incredible nature of the story, it's important to note that it was written for the American Weekly by a very credible source, a botanist and naturalist named Willard Nelson Clute, who was the author of numerous books, including The Useful Plants of the World and the Dictionary of American Plant Names. and a dictionary of American plant names. I mean, who knows? Maybe the deadly people-eating plant of the Philippines still exists, still luring the unwary into its deadly embrace. I've talked to a number of soldiers who spent time in the Philippines, and they said there were things there that would just defy imagination. And finally, there's the 1881 account of Philip Robinson, who went under the punka, one of his uncle's near-death experience with a plant hungry for human flesh somewhere along the Nile River. Well, finally, according to what Mr. Robinson had to say, this awful plant tears the splendid death shade in the central solitude of a Nubian fern forest, sickens by its unwholesome humors all vegetation from its immediate vicinity, and feeds upon the wild beasts that in the terror of the chase or the heat of noon seek the thick shelter of the plant. The birds, fluttering across the open space, come within the charmed circle of its power, or innocently fresh themselves from the cups of its great waxen flowers, or upon even man himself when an infrequent prey, the savage reaches its asylum in the storm, or turns from the harsh foot-wounding sword grass of the glade to pluck the wondrous fruit that hangs plumb down from the wondrous foliage. And such fruit it is. Flourished old and nobles, great honey drops swelling by their own weight into pear-shaped translucencies. Foliage glistens with a strange dew, that all day long drips onto the ground below, nurturing a rank growth of grasses, which shoot up in places as high as so that their spikes of fierce blood-fed green show far above the green-tinted foliage of that terrible tree. Like a jealous bodyguard, keeps concealed the fearful secret of the charnel house within, and draw around the black roots of the murderous plant a decent screen of living green. I've heard several stories about deadly plants along the Nile. And there's still places on this planet that man has never set foot. And I'm sure places along the Nile that have never been explored. Well, let's talk about the Montauk Monster. Joe Nickel, a senior research fellow for the Committee of Skeptical Inquiry and investigative files columnist for Skeptical Inquirer, also a former stage magician, private investigator, and researcher. He's the author of numerous books, including Inquest on the Shroud of Turin, Pen, Ink, and Evidence, Unsolved History, and Adventures in Paranormal Investigation. Well, and according to what he wrote, in 2008, the carcass of a creature soon dubbed a Montauk Monster washed ashore near Montauk, Long Island, New York. Sparked such speculation and controversy that some suggested it was a shellless sea turtle, a dog, or a canine, or a sheep, or even a rodent, or a latex fake, or a possible mutation experiment from nearby Plum Island Animal Disease Center. Strange Saga, the admittedly very weird beast, is one that caught the attention of not just the national but international media. Hardly surprising, since the animal appeared to have a beak-like face, large claws, and a dog-like body. While the controversy rolled on for a long time and provoked deep rumors about what the government was doing, the answer to the riddle finally came, as Dr. Darren Nash noted. He began his dissertation with a question: is the carcass that of a dog? Well, dogs have an inflated frontal region that gives them a pronounced bony brow or forehead, and in contrast, the Montauk Monster's head seems smoothly convex. And as many people have noticed, there's a much better match. The raccoon, Procyon lotor. It was the digits of the hands that gave it away to him. The Montauk carcass is very strange, elongated, almost human-like fingers with short claws. And given we're clearly dealing with a North American carnivore, the raccoon is the most obvious choice. Raccoons are well known for having particularly dexterous fingers that lack the sort of interdigital webbing normally present in carnivores. The match for a raccoon is perfect once we compare the dentition and proportions. Montauk animal has lost its upper canines and incisors. You can even see the empty sockets. And if you're surprised by the length of the Montauk animal's limbs, note that like a lot of mammals we ordinarily assume to be relatively short-legged, raccoons are actually surprisingly leggy. So you have to ask yourself, what killed the raccoon? Well, there's long been a story. I heard it when I lived in New York about alligators in the sewers. They're maybe the most terrifying of all monsters, of those that we know exist. And when they're right under our feet, literally, they become even more fear-inducing. Let's talk about the alligators of New York. Talk about those immense bone-crunching beasts that lurk deep within the winding sewers and subways beneath the Big Apple. Now, most people assume the stories of New York people eating alligators nothing more than the stuff of myth and urban legend. In actuality, they're quite true. Proof alligators have been on the loose in the city for decades was provided all the way back in February 1935 when none other than the New York Times did a story that spelled out the situation, an article entitled, "Alligator Found in Uptown Sewer. Use Shoveling Snow, See the Animal Churning in Icy Water." According to the newspaper, a gang of boys led by Salvatore Condalucci actually managed to capture this approximately 7-foot-long creature and beat and stab it to death after it was seen lurking in the sewers on 123rd Street close to the Harlem River. More than 30 years, Teddy May was the commissioner of sewers in New York. He went on record as stating he'd heard tales of alligators roaming the sewers of the city as far back as the 1930s. That's the same time frame in which the New York Times reported on the violent encounter at 123rd Street. Well, May conceded he took little interest in the report since he thought it was all a case of folklore and legend and certainly not reality. As the reports grew in number, though, he decided enough was enough, and it was time for him to take a look for himself at what possibly was going on beneath the streets of New York City. His amazement and terror after descending into that darkness, mysterious and subterranean realm, he stumbled upon a number of significantly sized alligators swimming in the sewer waters. At that point, he realized these stories weren't just stories after all. Not surprisingly, he suddenly remembered a meeting he had to go to. And on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. Once again, you'll be listening to Ken Hudnall and the Ken Hudnall Show. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall saying have a truly great evening.